house put up 1890, December 24th, 1890. No longer than last night I felt a hand on my back. And from time to time I see a skirt. The bottom of it's that high off on the floor or the ground, but it's got square checkers in it, and you can see good enough they're brown, gray, and black. But you just see from the waist to the bottom of the skirt, you don't see nothing up. I was up in the attic, there's a gang of old books, some of them way back for the 1700s. Diplomas for people that like, for orchestra, stuff like that, music. And when I picked this Bible up, I looked at it, and it opened up to right there, where the hair first, when the page first opened, that's the thing was, and I saw something soft like a woman's hand hit me right on the side of the face. It didn't hurt me, it didn't knock me down or nothing, but I felt it. According to what other people have said, in other words, the past has now gone on, but it said if you leave a silver coin in a lock of hair, you can come back. I don't know. But I've heard it more than once or twice.
In every society throughout history, people have reported unusual experiences, wondrous events that appear to violate scientific principles. Such experiences include seeing a ghost or apparition, hearing unexplained sounds, waking up unable to move, knowing there's a strange presence in the room, having precognitive dreams and out-of-body episodes. These events are sources of wonder and awe. They are foundations for folk beliefs in spirits, souls, life after death, and alternate senses or ways of knowing. For more than 10 years, sociologist Jim McLennan has been studying folk beliefs and unusual experiences in communities throughout the world. Dr. McLennan's research has shown that first-hand accounts of psychic or supernatural experiences have similar features from culture to culture. This is an unexpected finding, since accepted theories would predict that as cultural backgrounds vary, so will the first-hand reports of supernatural experience. But Dr. McLennan found startling similarities in accounts of psychic or supernatural experience, even among peoples as culturally different as Japanese, Chinese, Caucasian Americans, and African Americans. Dr. McLennan has concluded that these experiences are common, persistent, and the basis for folklore and folk beliefs worldwide.
I'm standing by an old railroad trestle near Jamestown, North Carolina. This is a landmark in the folklore of this area. Some people say that near here a young woman was killed in a car accident as she returned home from her high school dance. People have seen her image along the roadway.
The story goes that on a rainy night, a man picked up a female hitchhiker along the road that once ran under this railroad overpass. The woman was wearing a long gown, soaking wet from the rain. In a barely audible whisper, the young woman said she wanted to go home. The man took the hitchhiker to the address she gave, but when he arrived at the house, she vanished. When the man told his story to the residents in the house, from his description, they identified the girl as their daughter, who had been killed in a car accident years before. This vanishing hitchhiker, or ghostly traveler motif, is a part of modern folklore.
There's taxi drivers in Okinawa that have had some of their passengers vanish. There's taxi drivers in Taiwan. When they go through this particular tunnel, their passengers vanish. I interviewed a bus driver in the Philippines, and a woman had gotten on his bus and then she just vanished. And there's even a story in medieval Chinese literature about a vanishing boat passenger. So this is a universal motif. And it's difficult to say exactly what this signifies, but we can see that these kinds of experiences produce folklore narratives. The experience leads to a belief in ghosts and things like that.
Folk traditions and beliefs are often passed orally from one generation to the next, shaped over time to delight, to instruct, and to fit cultural expectations. folk belief differs from formal religious doctrines. Folk belief is less structured and more associated with oral traditions. For example, some people believe in ghosts based on stories they've heard from friends, neighbors, and relatives. The media spread these accounts, contributing to modern folk beliefs.
A huge percentage of people have had these kinds of experiences, that they believe that they're in a house, that they live in a house that's haunted. It's really outside of the context of social scientific research to say what causes people to have these kinds of experiences. All we can do is collect the stories that they tell and then look for similarities, and that way we can delineate what's a product of the person's culture and what seems to be universal. The stories might be related to human physiology, but we really don't know.
The cultural source hypothesis is my term for that set of conventional theories that explains stories about supernatural belief and claimed experiences of supernatural belief as being produced by cultural traditions about them, so that culture produces the experience in the stories. The experiential source hypothesis that I'm proposing, and that other people are also suggesting, is that there are some classes of experience where that's not true, where the experiences are actually independent of culture, that they appear the same wherever you find them, and that they themselves have the capacity to produce similar cultural patterns in widely separate communities and cultures.
These stories have such distinctive features that they can be easily classified, grouped according to their primary characteristics. Examples include extrasensory perceptions, night paralysis or sleep paralysis, and apparitions. Each has unique qualities. Hauntings are collections of such episodes occurring in the same place over time and attributed to spirits. Many communities have their famous haunted places, like this house in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, once the home of Nellie Cropsey, murdered by her lover many years ago.
My name's Wally Horner. I've lived across the street from the Nellie Cropsey house for about 20 years now. And about 8 years ago, a friend of mine and I were standing out in the front yard, and at that point in time, the house wasn't being rented, but we saw a faint blue light in the tower window.
This is the Cropsey house, and it's so named because a young woman by the name of Nell Cropsey lived here in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and she was murdered. It is the only unsolved murder in the city.
We found that all the doors had been locked and there was no one in the house at the time.
Actually, it's a kind of a dilemma to have lived in this house. It's a beautiful house. It's big. It's very private. We enjoy it. But it's to live in a house that's more notorious or infamous rather than historical is difficult, because people don't really look at it as historical. They look at it more as infamous.
On closer examination, we found all the doors to be locked, and he tried to write it off as being moon coming through the back of the tower window and reflecting out, but it was a very poor lit night as far as the moon was concerned, and we just found no other explanation. So as far as I'm concerned, there was something very strange happening in the house at the time.
Oh, you live in the Cropsey house. And it's like, and then people who are around who have no idea get to hear all about how I live in this house that's probably haunted, that strange things might happen to the people who live there. I mean, they get into it. Everybody's got to have a house, and this is the one.
But hauntings also occur in commonplace locations, like a house and barn on Evans Road in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
I heard more from old neighbors many, many years later, and they told me things that I was not aware of, you know, that other neighbors, when they'd get by the house, they'd run by it, and if it was dark, they wouldn't go by the house. They'd get where they were going before, you know, they wouldn't go by that house after dark. My grandmother could hear things in the attic, which my bedroom was on the opposite side of the wall of the attic. She heard things in the attic banging around. And my sister was very small, and she was in the house alone. And I was out in the yard, and our parents were working. And she came running out of the house, screaming and crying, and she saw 3, I don't know what they were. There was like a mama bear, papa bear, and baby bear. There was 3 different sizes, like those sizes, large, medium, and small. And they just hovered across the floor and came after her, and they wanted her out of the house. And she went into a state of shock.
About 2 years after we moved in our new home, we started hearing noises and having a feeling of being watched. And it was mostly coming from my bedroom.
When I was 16, we moved into a house that was on Homestead Avenue in Quiog, and we found out the house was haunted. And what started it was that this little spirit creature, or whatever it was like a practical joker, because I would come home from school, and I would always be the first one out of 5 children to come home from school. And when I came home one day, it had all the ashtrays in the house lined up at the top of the stairs.
When I was 9 years old, we lived in a real old home, and it was haunted as ever you ever known. It was one of those homes that was so old that the kitchen wasn't even built onto the house. It was built off. We had to go out to get in the kitchen.
The room started getting colder than normal, and we couldn't figure out why. We checked the heating vents and everything, and the heat was coming out of the vents, but the room was still getting about 20 degrees colder than the rest of the house.
Then one day, I went to come home, and the house was full of dogs, a variety of different dogs, but it was full of dogs. And when I looked, I was like, how did they get in? But all of the windows were closed, the doors was locked, and there was no explanation of how these dogs got into the house.
Her mother and some of the family called back Betty's daddy, which he died when she was like first born, and they called him back in a seance.
And windows would fall and break. Mother would go look, there was no windows broke. Wood would be dumped in the yard. She would think Daddy had carried wood and dumped it in the yard, brought a load of wood, there wasn't any wood.
Then, one day, I was babysitting my little brother and sister, and we had big bay windows, and the outside light was on, it was dark, and the driveway came up to those windows, but I heard a car drive up, I heard people get out, I heard them laughing and talking, they walked around the house, they came back, I heard the car doors open and close, I heard the car start up and take off, and I didn't see anybody.
One night after I had went to bed, the room had gotten extremely cold, and after I was in bed, I felt something touch the bed, the blanket on top of me, and kind of rake across it, and it increased in pressure and started tugging on the blankets, so before I could grab the blankets, they flew off the end of the bed, and there was a wind just going all through the room. It wasn't from the vents, it was just, it was coming from different directions from the floor, and the vents are in the ceiling, so it was just totally impossible, and the room was cold enough to see your breath in.
Well, they couldn't get rid of them after the seance. The doors would slam, chest of drawers, doors would shut and open, paper would rattle, and I mean, he wouldn't hurt anybody, but it was very obvious that he was disturbed, that they had bothered him.
And then one day, my mom, one evening really, she went to bed. She was tired, and she said that she lay down, she fell asleep, and the weight of someone sitting on her woke her. And then she said it held her for a while, and then as she went to ease, she said she could just turn her head ever so slightly, and then finally she felt it raise up off her, and she looked like toward the window, and she saw this like a white film like float off to the window. Well, that was the first time that my mom actually believed things were happening to me.
And we continued to hear noises throughout in the room and throughout the house, and one night it just we heard something walk around in my room and walk down the steps, and he walked right out the back door, opened the door, and left. And we hadn't had any more problems like that since.
We would hear things walking on the porch. We'd never seen anything. We laid with our head under the cover.
Sometimes specific folklore patterns occur in haunting cases. One such pattern involves a reappearing stain. Dr. McLennan collected various stories that include the element of a mysteriously stained or bloody floor found in houses believed to be haunted due to violent tragedy.
Well, we heard a lot of footsteps and things falling upstairs, and one of my girlfriends told me that lived there that her uncle had died upstairs and another man had gotten killed on the porch, and it was a dark stain on the porch, which it wasn't there when we first moved there. It was painted. And we woke up one morning, it was there like a dark blood stain on the porch, and that's where the man had gotten killed.
I remember my father painting a place in the living room floor after we moved into the house. And it was like a dull burgundy kind of reddish stain that kept coming right back up. And he planed the floor down, and it looked good. And a day or two, that stain, exactly the same way, was right back. And Mother would go to the hardware store, and back then you would buy the old 9x12 flowered linoleums. And I don't know how many of those she bought. And as soon as she would put it down, in a few days it would come up through the linoleum. And finally she bought this pink flowered one, had these awful, ugly looking big pink flowers. I thought it was atrocious. And she put that down because the pink and the burgundy and all would kind of match the stain, which we knew was going to come right back up. And it did. And after I was grown, this guy that was 7 years older than I am, he told me that someone had been murdered, a man had been murdered in that living room.
A lot of things happened in the house that we lived in. We went on vacation one time and we came back and it was a puddle of blood in the floor. And it's like when my grandfather died, we were sleeping, because all of us stayed in the same house. My dad, my mom, everybody, my grandmother, it was 11 kids. And we used to sleep, everybody sleep, and my dad woke up and he woke everybody else up, look. And he claims that he saw a woman with no head and a skirt and a white shirt standing over him.
Another classification of unusual events is the out-of-body experience, where subjects describe the sensation of leaving the body.
It was one evening we was having a get-together, some friends and family that I haven't seen in a while. We were seated in the living room area of my apartment where we have a sectional couch. It's shaped in a C-type form. I was going back and forth between watching the Knicks game and listening to the conversation that was going on, when all of a sudden, you know, I just started to feel a whole lot different. I was seeing and hearing things that shouldn't normally be possible, seeing things from angles and perspectives that just didn't make a lot of sense to me. It felt as if I was standing behind everybody, towering above them and just watching everything that was going on. And then, you know, other angles also. I remember that the Knicks won the game, but I couldn't tell you exactly how, you know, how they went about doing it. And upon re-entry, I felt real insecure, you know, wondering if people noticed, you know, the changes that I went through for that brief minute or so.
I did this quite often. It was out-of-body traveling, and I would do it at night. And I can remember there always seemed to be a reason that I would go somewhere. Like I would go to somebody's house and find maybe she had borrowed a ring or she'd borrowed a piece of jewelry and she hadn't returned it and she keeps forgetting to bring it to school or something. And I can remember there being something about a ring and going to her house.
And I started to feel a lightness, a remoteness from myself, and I started to see the backyard again, except I never remembered to open my eyes. And I started to get really afraid when I realized that my vantage point at that time was ahead, actually in front of where I had been. There had been a table in front of me, and I was in front of that. I couldn't see it. At that point, I got really scared, and I started feeling myself being pulled back into my body.
I can remember lifting up, the typical lifting up that you read about, and traveling through nothingness, through the sky, and going to the house, and then finding what room she was in the house, and then kind of floating around in this room looking down until I would spot the ring, and I can remember bringing a ring back to my house that she had borrowed.
A related category of the out-of-body experience is the near-death experience. During a medical emergency or special psychological state, some subjects describe the sensation of leaving their body. Some see deceased relatives or friends. Some report seeing a bright light. These experiences contribute to belief in an afterlife.
Sometime during the operation, I was taken up above the operating table, up into, it wasn't a ceiling in the room, it was an opening, and it was bright and pretty, and the sky was blue, and it was very peaceful and calm, and it was some water flowing and flowers and trees, something like a meadow. And there were two figures with me, and they took me up.
I went out with some people and I got mixed up with the wrong crowd, and they had slipped something in my drink, and my body had, I don't know what kind of reaction it had to it. Only thing I remember is they put me in a car in the back seat, and I started going into convulsions. I started shaking everything, and then it was like I could see myself laying in this girl's lap, and she was slapping on me and screaming, "Let's get her to the emergency room." And I could see myself laying there like, oh my God, you know, that's you. What are you doing? You know, you're not moving or anything. And it really scared me.
I know that I was under anesthesia. I know this. But what happened is that I felt that I could see everything that was happening to me. And I could hear the doctors talking. I could hear them saying every step of the operation, but by right I shouldn't have been able to, because I was supposed to have been totally, I mean, this is like major surgery.
I don't remember getting into the hospital. I don't remember getting out of the car. I don't remember any of it. And I was on the hospital table, and I could hear my mother crying and everything, and the doctors talking, but I couldn't see anybody.
But I could see everything. I could see them. It was like I was looking down onto the operating table with me there. And I don't know if it helped at all, but what they said should have taken 18 days for me to get well. I was home in 5.
My spirit went back down to the table and joined my body. And I woke up in intensive care, and I wondered what I was doing there, because I didn't think I had been sick.
And the next thing I knew, I woke up, but before that I could see myself laying there, and my mother was crying, and everybody was just, and it was really bright. I don't know if it was the lights from the room or what it was, but I guess it just wasn't my time to go. But that happened.
Leaving apart the question of whether the beliefs are true or not, that widespread folk beliefs are supported by observations that actually, when we look at them close, are good reasons for the belief. We may not be able, we're not saying they prove the beliefs, but they show that the people who hold the beliefs are not foolish for holding them, that the beliefs are not obviously false given the observations that people all over the world keep making.
Culture influences attitudes toward unusual experiences. Within some cultures, certain events will not be believed, or they will be considered bad, so people won't talk about them. This would explain the findings of Erlendur Haraldsson of the University of Iceland. He found differences in the frequency of the reporting of psychic experiences in national surveys of 15 European countries. Although Professor Haraldsson found differences in the reporting of unusual events from country to country, in all surveyed countries, some subjects reported psychic episodes. One of these universal episodes is the feeling of being in contact with someone who has died. In the United States, 36% of the population will report having such an experience.
The contact with the dead category is something that we sociologists have created. And it all started off with Andrew Greeley, who asked a question on a questionnaire that he gave to a random sample of Americans over 10 years ago. And he asked the people, have you ever felt in contact with someone who's dead? And same question was used on random samples of European nations that Erlendur Haraldsson analyzed. And so I've used that question on my questionnaires. But what I've discovered from interviewing people is that you get a lot of different forms of experiences that fall within that category. Some people see apparitions of deceased people, so that's a contact with the dead. Some people have intuitive impressions inside their heads, and they just know that someone has died. So that's another form of contact with the dead. And some people just have a subjective sensation. And some people might see an object move around in a room, or a clock stopping at the moment that someone dies. So it's another kind of contact with the dead. So that category includes all these different forms of experience.
On August 17th, 1980, my son, Skip, who was 19 years old, was killed. I woke up at 3:29 a.m. and I said Skip 3 times, and I knew that he was dead. And I knew I couldn't do anything about it. I just laid there until somebody came to tell me. A lot of people came. I had a lot of friends, and people stayed with me most of the time for months. But a day or two after his funeral, I was sitting by myself in my living room, and I heard him say to me, "Please don't cry, Mama. Death's not that ugly. It's beautiful. You'll love it here."
And it was when my husband had passed away. And one night, I was in the bed, my daughter and I was asleep. And he came in the room and he said, "Well, what are the Mashunda doing in the bed with you?" And I looked at him and I said, you don't belong here. Go back where you came from." And he turned around and he went back down the hall, and I smelled, and I sit on the side of the bed, and I smelled nothing but pine. And he was a logger. He cut pine trees. I couldn't smell nothing but pine in my bedroom, down the hall, and in the bathroom.
When I was about 5 years old, I was a sleepwalker, and we had a 2-story house. And one night I was up, and I was at the top of the stairs. It was late, everybody was in bed. And I was getting ready to go downstairs, and my uncle appeared, and he picked me up, and he took me downstairs and put me on the couch and told me to stay there. And so I slept there, and then my mom got up in the morning, and she wanted to know what I was doing on the couch. And I told her what had happened, that my uncle had come and taken me downstairs. And she just told me, you know, "Oh, be quiet, you don't know what you're talking about."
The one downfall Ray had was he drank too much. By my sophomore year in college, he drank himself to death. For some reason, and I can't remember the reason now, I never went home for his funeral.
I saw him. We were driving, a friend of mine and I were driving down the road on Halloween night in 1980. And I said to her, "Well, I've lost my mind, Margie." A boy was walking down the side of the road, and it was Skipper, and even had on his clothes. And she said, "No, you haven't. I saw him too."
That same Monday, I returned to college, and I went up to the supermarket down the street from my dorm room to buy some milk and some bread. On my way back, and it's broad daylight, I see this group of older men, they're drinking. One of them turns around and looks me in the eye, and he just gives me this real warm smile. And it freaked me out because it was my Uncle Ray.
He would come when I would be by myself. And he came to visit me up until I was about 8 or 9 years old. But during this time, I kept hearing everybody talk about my uncle as though he wasn't there, as though he was dead. And when I would mention him, my mom would just tell me, "You don't know what you're talking about." I found out when I was about 8 years old that my uncle had died when I was 2. And all the times my uncle had been coming back to see me, that it was his spirit. And he had been dead for about 5 or 6 years.
Not all apparitions can be classified as contacts with the dead. Some people have reported seeing angels, demons, and other unidentified images.
Cynthia followed me into the kitchen and we were talking. And I was setting up the tea and putting the bags and getting the honey out when I turned around and I looked into the living room, and because I had a feeling, I had an odd feeling, just something made me look into the living room, and I saw something that just sort of went along with the feeling. I mean, the feeling was kind of as though the atmosphere in the room had changed.
Approximately 20 years ago, My 2 kids, my 2 sons, my wife, and my small baby went to visit my mother in Portsmouth. And when we were at her house, we all shared the same room for the night.
Today, I don't even remember the first person that noticed what I'm getting ready to tell you about, but it seems like maybe Portia, I don't really remember, saw it maybe at about the same time, and then we got the attention of the other 2, and then all 4 of us saw it.
And I had all day long been seeing these shadowy figures walking through the room we were in and going in and out of the room that my dad was in. I didn't want to say anything about it because I thought, you know, I could be very tired and exhausted, and I wasn't too sure what might be going on. So I just thought, well, I won't say anything about it.
So I looked into the living room and just saw something that was shimmering there, and it was like a pale pink cloud-like thing, you know, whitish pink, and it was just shimmering. It was right there in the middle of the living room, and just sort of faintly moving back and forth.
Approximately, I would say 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, everybody in that room sat up at the same time. The kids saw the same thing that my wife saw, which was a woman exit the room through a wall where there was no door, no window or anything.
You could make out the shape of a head and shoulders and like a long flowing garment. They glowed from within. You know, it wasn't like moon coming through the leaves or the trees or anything. These glowed on their own. You could not see eyes or nose or mouth or anything like that. They were going up and down the steps.
And my sister turned to me and she said, "Did you see that?" And so then I realized that we were actually experiencing something. I said, "You mean the shadows?" And she said, "Yeah, these shadowy figures." And I said, "Yeah." She said, "They just came out of Dad's room." I said, "Yeah, I saw them too." She said, "How long have you been seeing them?" I said, "All day." And she said, "So have I." He died that evening.
And as she came closer, and we both felt afterward in talking about it, that this was a female presence, that it was a feminine presence, not male, but female, and not asexual either. The hum or the vibration got more intense, and it was very pleasant, very harmonious kind of feeling. And she came to the threshold of the kitchen. That was about maybe 20 feet from where she'd been in the living room. We were both watching her. And we weren't feeling threatened at all, so we just stood there. And she just stopped at the threshold and watched us. We just kind of, you know, just hovered there, and we just waited. Like, well, what's going to happen now? Just a little bit nervous. And then all of a sudden, she dissolved and was gone.
But I felt its presence. I knew it was there. I felt the temperature in the room rise 10, 15 degrees, I know. I said to them, lay back down and go to sleep, and they did. They weren't afraid. I wasn't afraid at that time, but later I did get afraid. It terrified me when I thought of the possibilities.
I was naive enough at the time to want to wake up Sally's dad. I said, no one's going to ever believe us, you know, and it's important that an adult sees this too, because if an adult sees it, then everyone's going to believe us. Well, today I realize 50 adults could have seen it, and we'd still have people that would say, oh yeah, what are y'all smoking? But believe me, back in those days, the only thing to smoke was tobacco.
Oh, and by the way, that's the only thing that's ever happened to me that pertains to supernatural or ghosts or a spiritual experience or whatever. And by the way, I don't believe in ghosts.
The episode Dr. McLennan calls night paralysis is essentially the same as what medicine refers to as sleep paralysis. People who have these experiences wake up during sleep, find that they are unable to move, and often feel terrified. They sometimes experience other strange things, such as a feeling of pressure on the chest, as if attacked by a demonic force. Sometimes they see apparitions and hear unexplained footsteps. Although their experiences may have a physiological explanation, these episodes contribute to belief in devils and demonic forces.
All right, I had a dream the other night. It was the most exciting experience I ever had, I believe. And when I was in my dream, I was in one room, I walked into another room, and when I shut the door and I walked in, the door slammed open behind me. And when I turned around to look, I know it was Satan. He walked in, it was like his sidekick with him and his pet. His pet was half dog and half human. I mean, it was the weirdest looking thing I've ever seen, but they went in and sat down, and I asked him, I said, hasn't Jesus already dealt with you in the desert? And he says to me, yeah, he has, but now it's time for us to deal with you. I went to run for the door, and as I got to the door, his pet made a break for me, and I froze, and I couldn't move. And I remember waking up out of the dream, and I still couldn't move. I was fully awake, but I couldn't move. It was just like something was holding me down.
And this particular night when I went to bed, I woke up maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I couldn't move. I had to get up, but I just couldn't move.
One day about a year ago, I was asleep on the couch, and I woke up and I wasn't able to move or open my eyes or talk or anything, and I was sitting there and I was talking to myself through my head. I was going, Aretha, get up, and I couldn't move. And then I'm not sure how long it went on, but my mom came through the door, and I guess it was the noise, and it just broke it, and I was awake. I was able to get up.
I don't know, I had tears coming down my eyes. I wasn't thinking about nothing, and I tried to get up because I was real scared because I felt like things were moving around in the room, like, not ghosts, but it just seemed like I was seeing something, and I was trying to get up. My whole body was just stiff. My arms were beside my legs, and I just couldn't move. So I just started calling on the name of Jesus, and then I called it several times, and then it went away.
I remember trying to get up off the bed, and I couldn't get up. And I remember screaming, and my mother ran into the room where I was, and the only way I could move was she touched me. And once she touched me, I could move. And once I got up, she asked me, you know, what was wrong? And I said, well, I don't know. I just couldn't move.
And then when I did get sat up out of the bed, I went, I woke my girlfriend up because I was so frightened. I just wanted somebody to touch me. And then I went to light a cigarette, and when I lit the cigarette, it was like the flame flickered on the lighter, and I could have swore something walked by my room. And I can remember getting even more, I was real scared. I just put it like this, I was scared to death.
Extrasensory perception, or ESP, is the acquisition of information without using known sensory channels.
We used to go down there to ramble in the woods. It was all a wooded area. And on one occasion we were over there, and that's about 4 or 5 miles from here. And I all of a sudden had a feeling that my house was on fire. And I told the fellas, I said, I'm going home because my house is on fire. And they said, he must be nuts. But 2 of them had enough confidence to follow me. I was running back this way. And when I reached the campus, I saw the fire truck and a crowd of people out here. And when we came up and asked what happened, the fire chief said that evidently a bird had picked up a cigarette or something and put it in a nest because there was no area for heat or nothing, natural heat to be there. And he determined that this bird put the cigarette in there to cause the fire. But the thing that baffled the group and me also was the fact that I detected this without anybody saying anything. It just flashed in my mind.
I had a dream when I was in 4th grade that I was reading in my social studies book,
and I came to the word immigration and stumbled on it. And at the time, it didn't seem that it was a very significant dream. But about 2 weeks later, I was in social studies class, and I was reading out of the textbook, and I came to the word immigration and stumbled on it. And it was very strange to me because the word immigration was in the same place in the text, the teacher was in the same place in the classroom, and everything around me was just how I had dreamed it.
And while sleeping one afternoon, I dreamt of a sweater that he had in his chest. And I asked him after dreaming, do you have a black and blue sweater in your chest? And he said, yeah. I said, well, does the neck of the sweater cut across, come higher up on the neck and cut across? And he said, yeah. And he said, why? I said, because I dreamt that you had such a sweater. And he backed up when I told him, you know, and he was afraid, I guess. I wasn't. It wasn't as exciting for me as it was for him, I suppose. And he went into the chest and pulled out the sweater, and there it was.
I dreamt I was down a dirt road, and I found lots of money, lots of bills, and I didn't know what to make of it. So that Sunday he was at church, and he said, I lost my wallet, and I had all my money in it. So I said, that's strange. I said, this week, I dreamt about it. I found a lot of money. And I said, it was down a dirt road. I said, did you travel down a dirt road that day? He said, well, I went down a paved road to get to my field. And to the field, I worked, I think he was working in corn. And he said, well, that was dirt across the end of the field. And I said, I feel like your wallet is down that road. He said, I went back and I looked. I said, but in that dream, that's where I found that money. So he looked, he couldn't find it. And after a year had passed, he went back down that, he was in that same field, and he found his wallet.
I was at a garage sale looking at some things, and this lady comes running across the lawn. I didn't see where she came from, and she says, oh my God, I lost my purse, help me, I can't find it. I was here about 20 minutes ago and I can't find my purse. And as she was talking, I could see where the purse was, and I started walking over to a car, because I knew the purse was in that car. And as I walked to the, I said, I know where your purse is, and as I walked to the car, she follows me. And she said, well, I just came back here. I thought maybe I left it here at this garage sale. And I opened her driver's side door. I still didn't know it was her car. And I reached under the seat and I said, here it is. And she said, ah, and she threw her arms around me. And she said, I thought I lost it. She goes, how did you know it was there?
In some cultures, some unusual experiences may be highly valued. For example, a visit from a deceased loved one may be considered a wonderful event. In that instance, people will talk about the experience, and that story will be told and retold, becoming part of the folklore.
Experience very definitely influences people's beliefs. And I would suspect that people that given the nature of America as a society, that people are likely to have very many of the same experiences, and that those similar experiences would influence beliefs sort of cross-culturally in some ways. What I would probably take issue with is the fact that I would also tend to believe that even though people may have similar experiences that will influence and be influenced by their beliefs, that there is a cultural dimension there, in that once one has an experience that is of a supernatural nature, that one is likely to take that experience back into the culture for interpretation, so to speak.
People interpret their experiences based on their cultural framework. Some experiences are culturally unique, indicating that culture can shape perceptions to a degree. For example, one person might interpret an unexplained light as a UFO, while another labels a similar event as a jack-o'-lantern or swamp spirit. According to the folklore, the jack-o'-lantern swamp light is believed to be able to harm those who see it.
We went to my parents' home, and they live in a very large wooded area, big home. My husband decided he was going to go hunting in the morning. And I said, fine, you know, and he got up that morning about 4 o'clock in the morning to get ready. And he was trying not to wake me, but of course he certainly did. And we chatted for a while, and he left. And I was trying to go back to sleep, and in the window there was a very bright light. And at first I thought maybe he was trying to kid me with a flashlight. But I knew enough time had passed by that it certainly couldn't have been him, and the light became brighter and brighter and brighter. And it got so intense that my body actually froze towards the light. There was just no moving away from the light. And I don't really know exactly how much time had passed by, but the more intense the light became, the more I was paralyzed towards the light. After a while, I became, of course, certainly very frightened by it, and I tried to scream. And no matter how I tried to scream, nothing would come out.
So we went on walking, kept on walking. Presently, we got up there, and around then there was a cemetery sitting over there in the field. And looked, the light shine way out the cemetery, right on up, way to just the flare of the light. But the light part was still down in the cemetery, shining way up yonder. And way up on top of the light, when the light started going down, looked like somebody put something on top on it like that, and that's back, right back down that cemetery. He said, you still ain't gonna run? I said, I ain't gonna even run, Luke. I said, go, you'll get left.
And I had run to my parents' room, and I had tried to wake my mother up to tell her what was happening, but I had no voice. There was just nothing there. And at one point, I thought maybe I had even died and that this was like going to be my living hell. You know, this was it. And I had fallen asleep on the floor by their bed. And in the morning, when I woke up, you know, I shook my mother, and I was red, like from here up. My whole face was completely burned. My right eye was completely swollen shut. My left eye, I could see out of it a little bit. It was swollen as well. All the blood vessels in my face had broken, and I certainly had no voice. I mean, they were terrified. I mean, they just had no idea what had happened, and I was very shaky, of course, and upset, and I was trying to write on paper and tell them. And of course, when I was telling them about this experience, they thought I'd lost my mind. They just said, oh, you know, this is not right. And they're both in the medical profession, and we went to see a doctor. And the doctor looked at me for about a minute or two, and I remember he just sat back in the chair, and he says to me, you know, you've got to tell the truth. You know, he said, were you playing with a sun lamp of some sort, or did you play with fire? And I mean, I'm 22 years old. I was not a little kid, you know.
So went on, and when we got upstairs and was telling the other fellow about it, I looked out the window, stairs window. I was young to go that light. So I was young to go bouncing across the field, going across there.
I always call it my Martian story because I don't know what to call it. And to me, it was just something extraterrestrial.
And so we learned after then, if that Giacomo Lana had got up by us, he would get us way back in the swamp. I said, who in that tote me? He that tote me, because I just fell out there. I said, both of them been together, you had a handful. He said, you in that Giacomo Lana could have carried us too? And the man said, I don't know, it could have not. And made the light look just about big as a man's head or pumpkin or something, you know.
Responses to Dr. McLennan's questionnaire from Chinese, Japanese, Caucasian Americans, and African Americans indicate that all these groups reported having unusual experiences. However, the reports of unusual experiences varied. Within each cultural group, some people described numerous episodes. Others had one experience, and many reported none. The variations between groups suggests that culture influences the reporting of unusual events. Chinese students reported far higher levels of unusual experiences in most categories. Yet, examination of first-hand accounts show that primary features within some types of experience are universal. The conclusion must be that while culture shapes the reporting of these events, the experiences have elements transcending culture.
The students in the People's Republic of China have a very high rate of a wondrous experience. They report a lot of events, and a lot of them are quite puzzled by this because their government tells them that there's no God and no religion, and they're being good communists. They've accepted those doctrines, yet they still have wondrous experiences.
Findings from the research of Drs. McLennan, Hufford, and Harrelson may have profound implications for the sociology of religion and folklore, and for understanding the special tensions created between cultural institutions and the experiences of average people.
Cultural institutions have a strong interest in interpreting experience and observation and creating a sort of stable and consistent view that fits with all kinds of different social factors. The experiences of ordinary people from that perspective are wild. They keep contradicting or running against the official interpretation, so that we could say that institutions are constantly trying to get control of and narrow the interpretation and the range of acceptable experience and observation, whereas the lives of ordinary people are constantly bringing forward new observations and experiences that don't fit with the official institutional interpretations. And that's a constant and interesting dynamic tension between folk belief and the beliefs of institutions in our culture or any culture.
Predictions about religion during the 19th century were that industrial societies would lose their supernatural beliefs. It was thought that education and science would eliminate belief in spirits. The great surprise is that there are still widespread supernatural beliefs among educated people. This is contrary to the prediction.
Both the secularization processes in the West and the official authoritative efforts to suppress religion in the East have not produced the effect that everyone expected them to have. I think it's clear that one reason that these beliefs persist and keep springing up over and over again where you don't expect them is that they are based on experiences that are recurring. They're universal human experiences that occur in all communities and at all times. And as long as they continue to occur, they will continue to provide a basis for the continuation, development, elaboration of these institutions and traditions. I don't think that we could have a decent theoretical understanding of religious belief or supernatural belief in general without recognizing the role of these experiences in those beliefs.
Emily Dickinson wrote, "Wonder is not precisely knowing, and not precisely knowing not, a beautiful but bleak condition. Wonder is beautiful because we typically associate it with profound meaning. Yet it is also bleak. Scientists do not completely understand what triggers wondrous events, and people's accounts do not furnish scientific proof for any belief or doctrine."
By studying these kinds of events, by studying wondrous events, we can gain a greater understanding of the effects of our own culture on the way we think, and also the effects of these universal features on the way we think. And by gaining that understanding, we gain a greater realization of what it means to be human.
Part of being mature is to recognize the boundaries between scientific knowledge and religious faith. Wonder is associated with not knowing. Yet many of those who have had a wondrous experience claim a form of certainty. We can see that various types of wondrous experience occur frequently within all groups, regardless of age, sex, race, and culture, and that some features within these accounts are cross-culturally consistent. Such accounts provide a foundation for folk belief in spirits, souls, and life after death, and alternate ways of knowing. Wondrous events reveal universal processes, deeply associated with what it means to be human. All people share that beautiful but bleak condition of not precisely knowing and not precisely knowing not. This is the foundation of folk belief.
Something looked like a cloud mist came into the door. It was working. And when they got through, it was the picture of Jesus, the form of Jesus, praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. I know you've seen the picture where the light was shining on him. And I said to Reverend Clement, I said, Reverend, look. And when you turn around, everybody in the church stopped and looked.
People had heard
and people began to
piano
praise God.
playing in an area of the house that was no longer a room. It was completely sealed off. It was just nothing. There was nothing there. There was no piano there. There was no one living there. It was simply a hall. And they'd heard the piano playing in
I heard a
the middle of the
loud
day. You know, someone who
mourning.
played quite well.
An old man's mourning behind the furnace, which was in back of me, in that corner. So I left everything and I ran around like I wanted to help a man who was in pain. And when I ran around that furnace and didn't see anyone, that frightened me. My legs were shaky. I went up the stairs as quickly as I could and ran out there to the car, and I hoped that nobody would notice
Positioned the
how
car
upset
right in
I
front
was.
of a long dirt road,
But
which
this morning,
was probably a mile long, and we looked down it because there was supposed to be a ghost light that would reappear and appear at certain times, and so we waited there for it, and we waited about 10 or 15 minutes, and all of a sudden a light just appeared probably 10 feet off the ground in midair.
Church
and
where I was at the time, and I heard footsteps starting from the bottom of the stairs, and my mother and a couple other friends of mine were the only ones in the church at the time. So I decided to see who it was, and I heard this footsteps come up and turn, start to come up the other stairs, so there was nobody there. I was scared. I just stayed right where I was frozen, and I heard the footsteps come up to me, and as it passed through me, I felt a tingling kind of warm.